So for the first 4 months, it was like I didn't change anything for the first month or two. And then I started listening to podcasts.
We are about to launch.
Truth, not trend. What's up, everybody? Liam TAKU Bauer here at TNT Strength headquarters, Oakland, California. This is the Truth Not Trends podcast, the place where we help you maximize your strength as safely and efficiently as possible. My name is Liam TAKU Bauer, and I've been a strength and conditioning coach since 1988. That's right. This year is 37 years.
37?
Shut up. And I am still going strong. Today was another in our long line of newly created TNT Strength Success Series episodes with our guest, Mr. Greg Jones. Greg Jones, who is a former naval operator, he was a bombardier and navigator in the Navy for many years, got into construction, has always been active in sports and fitness. But in the last 5 months, he's been on a brand new journey with TNT Strength. And today he was kind enough to join us live in the studio and share all those amazing results. And trust me, they are amazing. I'm super proud of his success. He's done some nutrition work with us as well as the strength training, and he is just crushing it. Now, before we get to that episode, don't let me forget to tell you all about the amazing Anata Gym. If you are looking to build the best home gym possible, I highly recommend you check out Anata Gym. Anata Gym makes smart gym platforms. We have 2 of them here at the TNT Strength Studio. And these are programmable platforms with built-in computerized strength profiles, which you can completely control either with the touch of a button or with a free app on your phone. These devices are small and can be used to do pretty much any barbell, dumbbell exercise that you can possibly imagine, including, bench presses, deadlifts, squats, shoulder presses, curls, rows, whatever. And the P1 Max, the flagship, goes all the way up to 330 pounds of resistance. Almost nobody's going to outgrow that baby. I love it. It's one of my favorite tools right now. If you're interested in checking out Anata Gym, visit the site. And if you like what you see, use the code TAKU, that's TAKU, and you'll get 20% off anything in the Anata Gym store. With that in mind, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Truth Not Trends with our guest, Greg Jones. Boom, baby.
Boom!
All right, we are back at TNT Strength, and I am happy to welcome another guest in our TNT Strength Client Success Series. Today, we are privileged to have Mr. Greg Jones in the studio live with us. And why don't you give a little background on yourself, Greg? That's always kind of where we start, and then I will start firing off amazing questions.
Okay. So I'm 59 years old. My background, I guess, athletically was in high school. I was not a great athlete, but I was very active in athletics. Played a lot of JV sports. And then that kind of segued into getting into the Naval Academy, where I was very active, and then a career in the Navy for about 11 years, where I was a naval flight officer, bombardier navigator. In that role, was active in that when you're flying in a tactical airplane, you're pulling a lot of G's, and basically just being able to work and sit up straight requires a lot of effort while you're doing it.
Did you guys have to wear G suits?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
Since then, I've been working as a project manager of construction, and essentially over the last 2 or so years, I've been kind of going on a journey of improve my health. I'm getting close to 60. I guess you could call this my midlife crisis of trying to get healthier, because I know that as I age, things are going to get harder to improve. And so I should do it now and then try to maintain.
At least you didn't like run out and buy a Lamborghini.
Yeah. or get a girlfriend.
You could save some money and invest in something more important.
Right.
In the Naval Academy, is it like a big part of it? I mean, you're not just a college student, but do you also have to do they require like certain types of PT and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So especially in the first year and particularly in the first summer, about 8 or 9 weeks of very intensive. It's a lot of aerobic training, a lot of PT, basically body weight exercise and running and calisthenics. Yeah.
Push-ups, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Keep it busy. So
actually not a lot of weight training. I mean, they had weight training rooms, but they were mainly for the teams.
Yeah, for sure. I know my dad was in the Navy. I know they have those, of course, the Army Navy game, right? They stand up the entire time, right?
Yeah.
When they're there. You got to be all that tradition. All right. So first question is what initially inspired you to focus on adding lean muscle at this stage in your life? Was there a specific moment that made you say it's time to make a change?
Well, actually, it's probably about step 5 in a process, which began in October of 2022. I had an older half brother who died of a massive heart attack, and also when I was much younger, my mother died of a stroke when she was 52. So there is a family of history of heart disease in the family, and so at that time, the first thing I looked at was my weight, which was borderline overweight, but still kind of kissing what's normal. I'm 5'10" and I was 175. So that's kind of the upper limit of what all the medical charts say is normal.
Right.
At the same time, my wife wanted to go on a diet. And so we kind of did it together. And really, by increasing our activity levels and at the same time changing the foods that we kept in the house, I was able to, I wouldn't say that dieting was easy. It's particularly it's hard to start. And once you get started and you kind of get the momentum going and you get the foods that are in the house and your menus and everything kind of worked out, it gets easier and easier.
Yeah. I used to do a lot of in-home training early in my career. I was part of a small group that only did that. Literally went to people's homes and did workouts and stuff. And part of our service was that exact thing. We would literally go in, clean out the cupboards, help them shop,
right.
Replace, and it's funny how people are like, well, I got all this stuff, cookies and goldfish and whatever. And it's like, what should I do? And I'm like, just wrap it up, give it to the church, or you know what I mean? Literally, just you got to get it out of the house. Don't wait for it to be gone.
Right. Well, it was kind of interesting because I figured out a few months into it that really my Achilles heel was crackers and cheese. And as soon as I could find some, and it was like I wouldn't be like starving. I felt like I needed something to settle my stomach.
Sure.
If between meals. And really, the trick was finding something to substitute for that. And I went to like almonds. And basically, once I made that change, it was kind of like smooth sailing.
Yeah.
And then basically, I dropped down, and the lower limit is 132. I was like 145. So I was like, okay, I'm probably about at the optimum weight for my level of activity. And then suddenly people that were friends and acquaintances and family members, if they hadn't seen me for a while, they'd see me and they're like, you need to gain some weight. and actually I had acquaintances that were like, are you sick or are you taking chemo?
Right.
And it was like, okay, well, this isn't a good look.
You went a little too far the other way.
Well, but then I'd go to the doctor and I'm like, do you think that, I'm underweight? And they're like, well, let me look at the table. Yeah. No, you're great.
Yeah. That's unfortunate, but it's true.
But then kind of the next thing was about a year later in 2023, I went for my annual physical. And actually it was the first time I'd done that in a while. And, historically I've had high cholesterol, but it's never been really a concern per se. The doctors are like, well, you could probably lower your cholesterol, but you're fine. And basically when I went to my annual physical in 2023, the doctor's like, I want to put you on a statin. And so, kind of my thinking was, okay, I thought they usually tell you to change your diet and try that first.
Yeah, right. You would hope.
Not let's put you on a drug that you're going to have to take for the rest of your life in order to avoid heart disease.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, let me try changing my diet first.
Yeah.
And so, basically I went and read up on the internet, which is always dangerous. So I'd like try to like look at where the source is. Okay, is it Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo Clinic?
Right.
They're like, it may not be right, but it's probably been peer reviewed and it's at least not just somebody's opinion.
Sure.
And so basically I looked at all the foods that they recommend for lowering cholesterol. So we started eating a lot of oatmeal, kept eating almonds, tree nuts were good, and blueberries. And actually the other thing that I read was that, especially as you get older, increasing your muscle mass helps to improve lowering cholesterol. And so at that point, it was probably like February, March of 2024, I decided to start running. I had been fairly active because we have an active dog that really requires a lot of exercise. So, kind of the typical outing would be 30 minutes to an hour, maybe an hour and 45 at the most, but then stops at parks and throwing the ball for the dog and making it do sprints.
Yeah, right.
And so basically what I started doing is, okay, well, I'm walking through the hills. So on all the downhill sections, I'd start running. And then gradually, as I felt like I could do more, I would start running the flats. And then eventually over probably a 2 or 3 month period, I got to where I could actually do a 6-mile circuit. And the only time I would walk was as if I was going up steps.
Yeah.
If it was so steep uphill.
Sure.
Because essentially, if you try to run a step at the beginning of your 6-mile run, you're not going to make the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the dog loved it.
I can imagine.
It was like a big fartlek because the dog would run 6 miles with me, which was an easy pace for it, and then stop at every park and chase balls and do sprints.
Yeah.
And then continue running.
He was happy.
Yeah, dog was happy. And actually, I requested a cholesterol test, and so back in November of 23, my cholesterol was 258. Then when I started running, it had dropped to 213. And then by July, I did another test and it was down to 184.
Nice.
So, 200 is kind of the threshold.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, I know that diet and exercise works, whether it's, a sustainable lifestyle that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Don't know, but I do know that from what I've experimented with that it is possible.
Sure. And you didn't need the drugs.
Right.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah. But then kind of the other thing is about running was that it was really hard to keep the weight on.
Yeah, for sure.
The more, so I'm like already down to this level where people are, commenting about my looks. and then I start running and I drop 5 pounds.
Right. Yeah. It's hard, because you're being very active.
Yeah. And so basically at that point, I decided that, I needed to do something to gain weight. And I didn't want to, everyone's like, well, just go out and drink a milkshake and have a hamburger and fries. And, and it's like, okay, well, if I do that, I'm just going to spike my cholesterol and it just like undoes all the work that I did.
Right.
And so basically I started shopping around and looking for a program, where I could basically build muscle mass was the main goal. And actually the reason why I chose TNT Strength was because in your website, you showed people that, you showed older people and it wasn't people like in like muscle shirts and coordinating workout outfits. So it was like, okay, well, these guys aren't about the hype.
No.
And they're not going to try to train me to be a power lifter, and if you don't do that, you're a wimp.
Right, for sure. That's definitely not our thing.
Right. Well, and also that it seemed like a logical program that was looking at a way of basically improving health and coming up with definable results.
So before you started working with us and me with things, what did your sort of nutrition routine look like? What did you feel like were were there challenges that you faced with it, if there were any?
Well, essentially the nutrition routine was, I was mainly trying to stay away from saturated fat. And then when I was hungry, I would go to the things that I knew would help benefit lowering cholesterol. So, I would typically have, my typical day was wake up, have coffee. And for years, I've been having a nutrition bar with my coffee, mainly because I figured out that chocolate and coffee, like a dark chocolate and coffee, taste really good together. And especially when I was trying to lose weight, it was, it would give me several hours in the morning where I wasn't like having hunger pains, and there was enough protein within that nutrition bar that it would kind of get me through several hours. And then when I did get hungry, I would have some yogurt and berries. And then
Like a Greek yogurt kind of thing?
Yeah. Greek yogurt.
That's always a good combo. It used to be Jesse's breakfast every day. Big giant bowl of Greek yogurt with fruit in it.
And actually, we would buy this Greek yogurt that like had a little thing of honey on the side, and so we'd have this yogurt, honey, and berries.
Delicious.
And then lunchtime would either be a cold cut sandwich or oats. Had a lot of oat lunches when I was at home and my wife was at home. If it's the two of us, the recipe works for two. It doesn't really work for one. So we only have that when she's at home and I'm at home. And then sometimes a salad and with like chicken on it. And then kind of a large dinner, and that would just kind of vary, day to day.
So now, recently, you've actually added an impressive 6 pounds of muscle since working with us, and specifically, dialing in nutrition stuff, talking to me about things. And what do you think is the biggest game changer for you in the terms of your training nutrition now compared to what you were just describing?
Well, I mean, the main thing is, that I've been purposely adding more protein. And actually, when I started out with the training, I started in October, so it's been 5 months now. So for the first 4 months, it was like I didn't change anything for the first month or two, and then I started listening to podcasts and started purposely adding more protein. I bought some whey protein powder. Started having that once a day, like 1 scoop a day, and tried to incorporate more lean meat into my diet. And then essentially about a month ago, at the beginning of February, I requested a nutrition consultation with you. And from what I've heard in the podcast that, Jesse kept saying that it's really important that you actually track your nutrition.
Yeah.
On a daily basis, that you log it and you write it down. Before that, I've kind of been doing things, it was like, okay, well, I was doing a mental, like, okay, yeah, I've had this, and this today. So if I add that, it'll get my protein up.
Sure.
But I wasn't logging it. I wasn't logging every single thing that I ate.
Yeah.
I hadn't needed to do that when I was trying to lose weight.
Yeah. Interesting.
But, because I'd done like some weight loss things like through Weight Watchers years and years ago. And kind of after logging things back then, I kind of knew what the steady state should look like.
Right.
And so we were able to just kind of create a lifestyle where we stayed at that steady state.
Got it.
But in terms of increasing protein and getting the correct caloric intake, I wasn't doing that through logging. And so when I requested the consult with you, I was looking at apps to be able to log it, because the trickiest thing is knowing how much protein, carbohydrates, and fat things have in them. And really, the apps are the way to simplify that the most, because they already have it kind of loaded in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So actually, at the beginning of February, I started logging things on Carb Manager, which is kind of interesting because it's a very low carb, keto centric type of app.
Yeah, it is.
But it's good even if you're not doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can create any plan you want.
Right. And the best thing about it is that it has the macros that show you graphically for your day how you're doing.
Exactly.
How you're approaching your goals.
Right, for sure. And once you create a plan in there, you can build it and lock it in. You may already know that. And then every day when you do log, it'll show you like, whether you met or exceeded or below your target right for the day, right? And say, oh, you need 20 more grams of protein, or you went over by 10, which I don't worry about if it's protein, right? Or you went over your carbs or under or whatever, but it'll still show you that as well. And you can even tap it and it'll give you the percentages,
Right.
So it'll show you, 47% of this and 37% of that, whatever, which is cool. Yeah. I've been using it almost without missing since 2019, probably. I've been using Carb Manager. I used to journal stuff and write it all down. But yeah, once I adopted Carb Manager, for me, it's just been super easy to use. And I just, it's become now, after years of doing it, it's just become like brushing your teeth. It's just automatic. I plan out my days. And because for me personally, I have a lot of repetition in my diet by choice. It makes it super easy because I can just go copy and paste, breakfast to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then if I do change my mind, I can just go back and switch it.
Right. Well, and it's smart in that, if there's certain food items that you eat on a fairly regular basis, that they show up at the top of the list every time, so they're easy to find.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and you can even create your own meal. Like say you did that blueberries, yogurt, honey thing, and you knew the exact amounts. You could make a custom, put it in, and then save it, and then you'll have your own little thing.
Well,
and you just choose that, and then just insert it anytime you want.
Right. Well, and
blueberries, honey, yogurt, bam. There.
Well, and so that's like one of my standard meals, and so it's just a click now. And I've also created some recipes where not the recipe isn't the important thing. It's just that I know that when I make that meal for dinner, I know what all the values are going to be automatically, and it gets entered.
That's awesome.
So in terms of target for protein and calories mainly, it was like, the main thing is what's your target weight. And so listening to your previous podcast, you always say, well, if you want to be 160 pounds, then you should go for 160 grams of protein and 1,600 calories.
Right.
And so when I went to Carb Master, it asked me the same question: what's your target weight and how fast you want to, in my case, gain it.
Right.
There's the half a pound a week or the 1 pound a week if you're more aggressive. I went for the half a pound, and it came back with 260 grams of protein.
Yeah.
And 2,600 calories.
Right. Yeah. Because usually, obviously, they want a surplus, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to gain weight. Yeah. It's not pure math, but the math is important, right? The calories do matter for both going up or down.
Right.
And
I think that the rule of thumb that you have is more valid coming down than it is going up. And the reason why I say that is because, if you look at one of the tools that TNT Strength uses is the in-body bioelectric impedance scale, that measures muscle mass, fat levels, and overall weight. And one of the outputs that it gives you is your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, which is basically the rate of calorie burn per day.
Yeah, if you're just
if you're just hanging out, if you do no activity, and then I have like my Apple Watch that tells me, calculates how many calories I've burned. Not that it's that accurate, but it gives you kind of an idea. And so, like for me, my BMR is running right around 1,600 calories.
Yeah.
So if I were to target 160 pounds and go for 1,600 calories, I wouldn't be able to do any activity.
Yeah.
And I'd be maintaining.
For sure. So, the reason why those are kind of metrics that we use so commonly is because most of the time
people are trying to lose
weight.
People are trying to lose weight.
Exactly. So that's the most common thing we see in our business, right?
Right.
Although, I work with people trying to gain weight, both men and women, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You have to nudge things the other way. But you're right. It is more centered on that because it's more common, that people come in with a few pounds to lose, right? And we want to steer them in the right direction. But the protein really is pretty constant. Like, it won't hurt you to have that extra protein. It's definitely got many benefits, in my opinion. But if you still were only getting at least 160 and bumping other calories up in fat and carbs, you'd probably still have a similar success, I think.
Yeah.
In gaining weight, I mean.
Right.
As long as you got it above that maintenance level, right? But yeah, it's working. That's the most important thing.
Well, and for me, one of the things that is always a concern is because of my age, sarcopenia, basically
Sure.
loss of muscle mass. And I think that part of the reason why people were commenting on my appearance was just because of the age-related sarcopenia, and it seems like it tends to come from your shoulders, particularly, and your upper body.
Well, yeah, I mean,
And then,
one of the problems, right? And this is something. Sorry to interrupt. Something that people
yeah,
don't really get is that so many people get the idea of losing weight, like you did,
mhm,
right? Which has its benefits often. To be underweight is, or slightly underweight, or at least at a good, set point weight for each individual is important and helpful. But people don't understand that it's not weight; it's fat, right?
right,
We don't need to lose muscle. We want to maximize it. And
yeah,
when you lose weight and don't strength train, usually you lose both, right?
right.
That's probably what was happening to you, right? You did lose weight, but you probably lost a little muscle along the way.
Right.
And so
Even
now,
even though I was running
yeah, yeah.
and using a lot of using my leg muscles
Yeah. It's
particularly,
just
and
it's not direct enough of a
yeah.
stimulus. So with that in mind, how has your perception of strength training evolved since starting the journey, especially with us? Were there misconceptions that you had before that that you got challenged along the way about it, or
Well, I think that essentially the way that I viewed strength training in the past was that doing that kind of the routine that I had when I was during plebe summer at the Naval Academy, where I was very active, doing a lot of calisthenics. That was the way to build endurance and strength, and then basically weightlifting. It was like more is better. You do 3 sets, and then you're in the gym for hours, and that's how these people get these strong muscular bodies.
right, right,
And you know and the other thing is that most gyms, I think it's part of the business, have to kind of create a hype in order to get people in. And as Americans, we tend to think quantity is better. More is better of everything.
absolutely, yeah,
And so when I initially came for the initial consult here, basically, the first thing that I was instructed was, we're going to put you on this machine, and we want you to do it for 2 minutes if you can. And that was the goal. And with the idea that if I could do that for 2 minutes, then the next time I come in, I would do they would bump the weight up, and then I'd continue doing that until I'd reach a point where I hit a weight where I couldn't do 2 minutes anymore. The other thing was that the recovery was as important, if not more important, than the actual strength, the lifting.
yeah,
And so you didn't want us coming in every day
yeah,
and going for an hour until we were exhausted, because you're fighting against yourself then.
yeah, exactly.
And the other thing was that the first thing before we got on any machine or lifted a single weight was, took me to the InBody scale. It's like, I really like that, because it was like, okay, well, we're baselining it, and we're actually going to measure and see if this is working. Whereas you get into a regular gym, and you're like, you're basically just going all out for as long as you can, for as many months as you can, and then you're hoping you get a result.
Exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately,
So,
it's pretty common, right? People are spinning their wheels all over the world with that, with all those reasons, too much frequency, too much volume, thinking more is better. And, even now, we have quote unquote experts out there, telling people that more is better, unfortunately, and fighting against the idea. So, we use the lens of efficiency and safety, right? And part of that is, the problem, coaches all have preferences, and they're trying to create niches for themselves. They're trying to separate themselves from the pack. They're trying to market. So a lot of what they're doing is really based on those things, right? It's not even based on the science. It's based on preferences and niches and looking different and having a wow factor, right? The whole concept of TNT Strength, which is the truth, not trends, is something that I developed probably almost 20 years ago now, that I wanted it to be based on what does the valid, current, reliable science tell us works. And I wanted it to be non-contradictory. And it's funny, I've been, talking and writing about this stuff for decades now. And I would be moderate. I'd be on forums and having conversations, and I would have these people who were trying to insult me say, everything you say always sounds the same. You know what I mean? And I was like, that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
I was like, that's a compliment to me, right? Like, I don't want to be constantly telling you something different. Like, what would that be? What would be the value in that? Like, why does it always sound the same? I'm like, because this is what works and this is what we're doing. But those guys, when they have that lens of, more is better lens or whatever, right? Then pretty soon you can't see anything outside of that, right? Because that's your view. And so I have to remind people all the time, like, this is where we come from. So that's why we skew in that direction. But we also know that it works. I mean, we see it every day, every week, every month, every year. When I first met Jesse, that was one of the light bulb moments for him. He was doing the same old stuff. He didn't know me very well. I was watching him do a workout and I said, "Hey, what are you up to?" And he's like, "I'm doing this and I'm going to add weight and do that." And I was like, I just literally said, "Why don't you just do the last set first?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was for him, he was able to like have that light bulb moment. Like, I don't know why I'm not doing that. You know what I mean? And then he was like, "I want to go talk to that guy some more." Like he made me think about something. And that's how it all started. That's what started the podcast way back when.
Well, and I think that, kind of my view of working out here has changed partly because of listening to the podcast and realizing that basically doing the set to failure is the point.
Yeah.
Is that, on the last rep, you shouldn't be able to do like the full rep. And, when I first started, it was like, okay, I need to save a little bit because I know that there's going to be, I need to make it to 2 minutes.
Right.
And basically, I'm at the point now where I'm looking forward to getting to the point of failure.
Yeah.
Because then I can move on to the next exercise, the next thing.
And the reality is, that 2-minute thing is, again, just as with beginners, we have a range, right? The anaerobic range is really anywhere between about 30 to 90 seconds. So we just use that as a place. We don't want to hurt people or scare them or make them too sore on the first day, right? So we have a range. We figure very quickly in our onboarding program, we're going to teach them how to work hard. Some takes longer than others. But yeah, hopefully almost everyone starts to recognize the value that really the last reps are the only ones that matter, right? Those last momentarily impossible reps, right? That's the secret sauce of the workout. Everything else is just warming up to that point. Like getting there is the goal, right? And it doesn't matter whether it happens in 40 seconds or 60 seconds or 90 seconds. And again, for us, because it's about efficiency, that's why we want to keep it somewhere in that range. Also, if we go too long, it's not anaerobic anymore, which is what strength training is. So, but yeah, so you're learning all that stuff, which is fantastic. Maybe walk us through like what a typical training session looks like for you, or how does it compare to what you might have been doing in the past?
Well, I really the only time I ever did any weightlifting was when I was in flight school. Had a bunch of buddies. We would go to the gym together, and it was 3 sets of 10, as much weight as you could handle, and it was a lot more performative than it was really. We didn't really know what we were doing, and so it was kind of like you want to look like the guys, in pumping iron, and so it was like a lot of work, and I really wasn't seeing any results, and kind of got frustrated. So other than that, it was. My workout routines, if you were really just taking the dog on walks and trying to increase the pace, increase the distance, increase the amount of hills that we climbed.
Yeah. So now, beyond the numbers on the scale now, which are amazing, what other changes have you noticed, like in your energy levels, or your mobility, or even just in your mindset about this stuff?
Essentially, the biggest gain that was when I was running from previous to that. And I would say that it's more or less maintained when I've done the strength training as well. But, to me, what's really the most remarkable is what I've seen in the numbers. And there have actually been some surprises there. So, if you look at when I started at TNT Strength, the first 4 months, I was making an effort to increase protein, but I wasn't doing it. I wasn't logging it, and I wasn't taking as much. I'd started doing the protein shakes. Really, what kind of changed that was in one of the podcasts, Jesse mentioned that he's got his protein shake where he gets the liquid egg whites, puts a pint of liquid egg whites, and then the protein powder, and you can get 75 grams of protein just on that one shake.
Yeah.
And so that's made a lot easier.
I similar meal almost every day.
It's made a lot easier to reach your daily goal of protein
Sure.
when you have that tool available to you. half a breast of chicken, about I don't know, 10 ounces of chicken is going to be 50, 60 grams,
Sure.
which is but that's a lot of food to ingest in order to get that benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, really, what was remarkable is, I looked back at my in-body results from the baseline. So the first 4 months where I was increasing protein and weight training and going on daily walks with the dog, basically, I was able to increase my skeletal muscle mass on average 2.5 pounds. I lost a half a pound of fat and I gained 3.5 pounds of weight overall. Well, just in the last month, when I've gone up to 260 grams of protein and 2,600 grams of calories, I've added another 4 pounds of muscle mass.
In a month.
In a month.
Yeah.
I've added 4 pounds of muscle mass. But the thing that's surprising to me is that I lost 3 pounds of fat.
Yeah. It's amazing, right?
Ingesting 2,600 calories a day, I lost 3 pounds of fat.
Yeah, I know people.
And I didn't change anything with my workout or activity routine.
Yeah, it's amazing. And people often don't think that it's possible to do both things at the same time, lose fat and gain muscle. But, again, that's something that we see all the time. And, you have, luckily, you live an active lifestyle, and you obviously, have a pretty, good metabolism. Even at your age, you're still a youngster in my book, but, you're lean, right? You're not carrying a lot of extra weight. Your goal was to gain weight. So you just have an advantage on a lot of levels over so many people.
Right. I mean, I really can't complain because I know how hard it is for the majority of the population to lose weight.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's funny. Like, I've worked with women trying to gain weight, of course, in my career. And, jokingly, we used to always say, but don't talk about it, right? Because everybody else doesn't want to hear that you're trying to gain.
Right.
They're like, what?
These are first world problems.
Exactly. You're struggling to lose 20 pounds and you're over here trying to gain more weight. Has there been anything like surprising or unexpected about the experience? I mean, you just described that, like, being able to lose and gain simultaneously. So a lot of people think building muscle gets harder as you're aging. And what would you say to someone in their 50s or 60s who thinks like maybe it's too late to make meaningful changes?
I mean, I'm at 59 right now, and I've made meaningful changes, surprisingly quickly, and actually, with unexpected results. Of course, everyone's not going to have the same results necessarily,
absolutely.
but really, I think the key is to measure and always look at what you're doing and look at the trends, because the number that on a particular day on the in body, it fluctuates a lot. Let's just say, I got a similar scale at home, and I literally weighed myself and took measurements in the evening and then went to bed and measured. I'd lost 5 pounds in the night.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it. And I went and measured myself on another scale and it was right. It was like,
there are always going to be some variance in those things.
So really, the number on a particular day isn't the important thing. It's the trend.
Absolutely.
It's like if you're on the same device day after day, week after week, and a few months later, your average gain is 3 pounds.
Yeah.
Then that's what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
You're not looking for the peak or the valley. You're looking for the average.
So I'm always trying to tell people that, number one, they're not 100% accurate, but they are generally very consistent, right? So you want to see that sine wave moving in the direction that you're targeting.
Right.
If you're trying to go down, the right things should be going down, and if you're trying to go up, the right things should be going up over time. Yeah, but it's not going to be like a big straight line in either direction. But you're absolutely right.
And if things are trending in the wrong direction, then you need to say, okay, what are the input factors that is it diet? Is it my workout? Am I giving myself enough recovery time between workouts?
Yeah.
And am I doing something in the workout? What's changed since it was trending the other way?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's important. So everybody, I try to remind people too. You're doing it. You're performing an experiment. With an N of 1, right? Because really, you're the only thing that matters. And that's a mistake that people make too. Unfortunately, is that they often will make too many changes at once, and then even if things are moving, you don't really know which thing was the lever that is making it move, right? So you need to have things pretty dialed and then change things one at a time, to see how you could just change protein, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or just take couple extra days between workouts or, whatever, as long as everything else stays the same. And then you start to see, oh, I make more progress when I have more time in between workouts, which is often surprising for people, but not unusual. I'm actually getting stronger and feeling better because I took an extra day, things like that. So, little things. Sleep, of course, is really important for all this process too, right? And as you mentioned, people don't understand the workout is just the stimulus, and the byproduct that we're after manifests while you recover, as you mentioned earlier. So
Right. Well, and the other thing is, like, the more I've done this and the more I've thought about it, as far as the weight training piece, it's kind of the progression of heavier weights and more time, being able, in some ways, your performance on a particular day is going to be affected by various factors.
for sure.
And some of the factors is if you're doing an exercise correctly, you're giving it all you got and you're not saving anything by the end, which means that the next exercise that you do, and you may not perform as well as you did last week.
Absolutely. The sequence matters.
The sequence matters, and it's kind of like you don't want to save things on, so it's kind of like the way I look at it is I give it all I got on the first exercise, and I don't care what it's going to do to the rest of the workout.
That's good. And one thing that we can do with programming is a whole other art and science in and of itself, is we can, with that intention, recognize, and this is something that we're always manipulating in the background, if someone has a target thing, I want my arms to be bigger, we're going to move that up sooner in the line, right? Because you'll have more juice available, right? If it's always the last exercise of the day, you're not going to have as much oomph, and you will have used up energy, time, resources, right? And so that's one simple thing we can do. So with you, we might even think about switching your workout around to more of like an upper lower or a push pull or something, so you'll actually get even more recovery, right? Because you're not doing total body. So that might be something to think about, and then try it for a month, and see if you don't make even more progress, because now there's a little more recovery between those sections, right? I talk about this all the time, and it's hard for people to imagine, but the strongest guy that we have that comes in here, he only trains his body in pieces, basically, right? There's a classic, what they call push-pull legs split, right? You do all the pushing muscles together, you do all the pulling muscles together, and you do all the leg muscles together. So there's no overlap because they work as a team. But he does that, but he only does one team a week. So it takes him 3 weeks to train his whole body, if you can imagine. So push, a whole week off, pull, a whole week off, legs, a whole week off, back to push, right? So 3 weeks between workouts. And he's like the strongest guy that we have. He comes to visit like once a month just to play around. And I had him in here, and he did, the whole stack on the leg extension, followed immediately by like a 250-pound squat, followed immediately by the whole stack on the leg press, that kind of thing. Had to add an extra 60 pounds to the abduction machine because it was too easy. Things like that, right? We have to add weight to machines because he's so strong. And he does the whole stack on the lower back. That's like almost 500 pounds on the lower back machine. And again, he's only trained, and also he works out at home, only at home when he's not here, with bands.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing we try to get people to understand: is the tool doesn't matter. You got to work really hard with whatever you have and recover enough. All those other little pieces of the puzzle, you will get results. That's why we are tool agnostic, right? We have every tool and we love them. But we're not guys that think you need only one thing to be successful. Like you were talking about, you got to be a power lifter, right? We know that's not true. So now that you've had such great progress, do you plan on to continue building on your success? Do you have new goals in the horizon? Or
well, I mean, I think for me, I'm going to keep monitoring, the fundamentals other than just muscle.
Sure.
I'm going to look at my cholesterol. When I was running, I got my resting heart rate dropped dramatically, got it very low, and I got my VO2 levels, very high for me. And not necessarily that those are the end all be all, but I think that they were a factor in lowering my cholesterol. And I think that probably, so what I need to do is figure out, right now I'm in a kind of a transition period because I'm building muscle. So I need to figure out what is the end state. What do I want the end state to look like? And then once I figure that out, how do I best maintain that?
Yeah. I mean, for us, we believe, that muscle is the most important thing, right? And strength training is the most important exercise. So our goal is for everyone to embrace it and try to make it part of their life forever, right? whether they do it with us or some other way, it doesn't matter. But just recognize, and what's amazing after all this time is that the science just keeps on coming out, right, proving all these ideas. I've had certain ideas about fitness stuff going back to the beginning of my career, for instance, that you can get huge benefits from cardiovascular training from much more brief, intense, interval style stuff compared to the zone 2, which has gotten popular again recently. You hear it constantly. Everybody needs to spend time in zone 2, and that was big back in the 70s, right? This pendulum is just shifting back and forth as always. But for years, I've been recommending more brief stuff and now the science just keeps pouring out about how it's just as good or better. And again, because my lens is what's more efficient, I'm always going to steer in that direction.
Right.
So what you're doing is a sort of interval training as well, right? You're not just slogging at the same pace for 40 minutes or whatever. You're up, you're down, you're faster, you're slower, right? And they're finding that, and this is current research. They're finding that even on a walking plan, you get more benefit. The research is showing this, whether by walking faster and then slower, right, versus just at an easy pace the whole time, right? For the exact same time, same distance, same right. But if one group, tries to walk as fast as they can for a couple minutes and then slow down for a couple minutes versus the group that just goes at an insane pace, the one that does intervals does better, even walking. So, again, I'm all about the efficiency. So that's why we do conditioning stuff here, which is unusual in our niche. But again, we always skew towards the efficiency, right? Walking is great for you, but I would never tell, we have a lot of runners here, right? Marathon runners. And so if they want to do that, it's great.
Right.
But it's not the most efficient way to get in shape.
Yeah.
Running 26 miles is not efficient. If you want to do it, knock yourself out.
Well, and people exercise for reasons other than gains and,
sure.
And, there's a social aspect to it.
Absolutely.
And camaraderie and
or even they're just hooked on those runner high.
Yeah.
You get the endorphins going. So if you could give one piece of advice to someone considering making a similar transformation as your own, what would it be?
Well, I would say that the main thing is expectations. You need to realistically figure out what it is you're looking to achieve. Of course, physically looking good is even though people may not say that, is always an objective. But I think that the overall health consequences are much more important and much more lasting in terms of because ultimately what we all want is a longer health span where you may live a long time, but you don't want to be basically isolated and immobile for the last several years of your life.
For sure.
And so you need to basically have your objectives and then try exercise, and then reevaluate. Is that taking you towards your goal, or are you making progress? And if not, then reevaluate and figure out, okay, why isn't it? My big takeaway from this 5-month experiment that I've been doing with TNT is that the nutrition and the recovery is just as important as the working out.
Absolutely, for sure.
And so, you need to look at what lifestyle inputs do you have that you can change if you want to change the result.
Yeah, I think, one thing that's nice is that most of the time, if you focus on just a couple of really basic things like getting stronger, right? Maybe, like you said, small nutrition changes or whatever. When you focus on these super basic ideas and put a little bit of time and energy into them, the other stuff comes along for the ride, looking better. Right. And I agree with you. It's totally valid, right? Like I've been telling people for years, aesthetic goals are just as valid as any other goal, right? And the truth is, inside, every one of us wants to look better, right? We all want to look good. I jokingly, I worked with a college kid years ago. His parents bought some sessions for him. He was young and had never done a lot of exercise. And he came in and sat down and I said, well, what is it that you were hoping to get? And he couldn't figure it out. And I said, you're in college. You want to look good naked. You know what I mean? And he was like, that's it.
Yeah.
I was like, we all want that. Like everybody wants that. No matter how old you are, right? It doesn't go away, right? And the good thing is if you just try to get as strong as you can, a lot of it just moves in the right direction, right? You can never be too strong, as one of my mentors likes to say. And I believe that's true. So I always recommend that you're just always trying to push against those edges as much as you can. Don't worry about all that data, everybody's getting weaker when they hit their 30s or you're losing, right? Just keep pushing them back against it, right?
Yeah.
As you say, the health span is the key. We want to be mobile and active as long as possible. My parents, my dad always took great care of himself his whole life, and went to the gym, worked out, and was totally active right up to the end. My mom didn't do those things and had a stroke and had a miserable, slow decline over 7 or 8 years. They were the polar opposites, and it's just not the way to go. And we've had some clients. We have clients all the way up into their 90s, and that's what we want. We want to see them being active until whenever else happens, but not stuck in a wheelchair watching the world go by. Nobody wants that. So it sounds to me like you started at a good time, right? And you're seeing that you can make changes. It isn't true that you can't make changes, right? At your age, right? Like you didn't miss the boat because you didn't start sooner. You're still making those changes. So that's awesome. All right, man. Anything else I can do for you? I think we can wrap it up.
Okay.
We got a lot of good questions, a lot of good info. I appreciate it. I don't want to keep it too long. Your schedule's like tonight. Questions, comments, concerns before we go?
No.
All right. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Boom, baby.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Truth Not Trends podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us, whatever platform you are on. And also always share these podcasts with a friend. If you want to find out about TNT Strength and training with us live in the studio in Oakland, California, visit our website at www.tntstrength.com. You can also call us right here in the studio, 510-768-5421. If there's a guest you'd love for me to talk to or a topic you want me to dig into, shoot me an email at TAKU@tntstrength.com. That's TAKU @tntstrength.com. And whatever you do, get rid of that stupid blue Bosu. We got a great show for you, ladies and gentlemen.
Mixed and edited by Desmond McNeese for We Mixed It, LLC. Go to whatsoundsawesome.com.
As safely and efficiently as possible.